Welcome to Health Hacktivators with lifestyle medicine doctor, GP and longevity expert Dr. Alka Patel. This show will help you to discover a hidden health hacking code that unlocks your phenomenal potential for an outstanding health span, lifespan and wealth span. The show features candid conversations with celebrities, influencers and industry icons, real life stories and cutting-edge health activating advice that other doctors might not tell you. Discover why now is the time to join the strategic self-care revolution and experience the profound effects this will have on your personal and professional success. Now, here is your host, Dr. Alka Patel.
Hi, hey, and hello, Health Hacktivators. On today's show, I have with me Geoff Holt, MBE. Now, Geoff is, well, he's an extraordinary man. And you know what? I don't want to say too much else about him at this stage because I just want you to meet him. I want you to hear his story and hear about his vision as well. So let's dive straight into the conversation. Before we get into today's show, please do support today's show partner, Youth and Earth. Youth and Earth have a range of products that I love to use myself to supercharge my metabolism, to support my health, and to slow down cellular aging. Just be sure you click the link in the show notes for exclusive offers, which Youth and Earth are so generously giving for listeners of this show. Oh, welcome to the show, Geoff. It is so great having you here this morning.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me, Alka.
So I want to really start right at the beginning because I'm very, very excited for listeners to really hear your story and your full story. So are you okay if we go back in time, back to maybe before that sort of age of 18, all those kind of tender early years growing up? I know sailing is a big part of your life. So tell us what growing up was like for you and how really did sailing become part of your life?
So it was a really happy childhood. My mum remarried when I was quite young, and my stepfather owned a small boat on the River Hamble, down in Hampshire on the south coast. And at weekends we would go sailing, to France, Ireland, south coast. At the time, it was a bit of an inconvenience. You wanted to be safe, go on holiday or play with your friends instead of being dragged away on a boat. But I guess looking back, it was those formative years where I learnt and honed my skills as someone who could sail. And it was good. It was a happy time.
Yeah. So you and the water sort of made friends relatively early on in life.
Yeah, and I left school at 16 and got straight on a boat. I went to, I worked on a charter boat in the Med for 6 months. Within weeks of coming back, I'd sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, still 16 years old. I did it again at the age of 16, so that was 2 Atlantics. And then I worked in the British Virgin Islands for a while in the boating industry, and then sailed back to the UK some years later. So it was like 3 Atlantic crossings before I was 18 years old.
Wow, I don't think many can claim to that. That is very formidable, incredible. And then what happened at 18, Geoff?
Yeah, and then my life changed forever. I was working in the British Virgin Islands, and I had completed some paperwork to join a yacht. I'd gone to a beach for an afternoon swim, ran down the beach, arms above my head, dived into the water, and hit my head on a sandbar. And at the tender age of 18, I broke my neck, right sort of at mid-level, and became quadriplegic, which means that effectively I do have a little bit of I've got no finger movement, I've got some hand movement, and I've got a little bit of shoulder movement. But apart from that, I'm paralysed completely from the chest down. It didn't hurt, to be honest. I stayed conscious. Luckily, a friend of mine was with me, and he pulled me out of the water. And then I was flown back to the UK eventually after 2 or 3 weeks in a hospital in Puerto Rico. And I spent a year rehabbing at a hospital in Salisbury. So that was certainly one of those life-changing moments when you have to reevaluate what you're going to be doing. Of course, when you're 18, you're invincible, aren't you? You're going to live forever. Nothing's ever going to go wrong. But I had to grow up pretty fast because I realised that, if I was going to live the rest of my life in a wheelchair, I had to, understand what that meant to me personally, physically, emotionally, and what I was going to do to earn money.
And how was that really for you? Can you really go back there, the emotions that come with realizing that your life has taken a 360? What was it really like?
It's a good question, because there was no real moment, like snap of the fingers, like, oh, that's it. I broke my neck. I couldn't move. I kind of felt I was going to get better. I just thought, doctors were going to make me better. I was eventually put in a room with 3 other guys, all my age, who had a mix of motorbike accidents and car accidents. And all of us then spent the next 10, 12 months coming to terms with our disabilities. And it was a very slow process. And if I said to you, being in a very, although young male environment, it was a male environment, a very young male environment, a lot of testosterone and machismo, and none of us dared let the others see signs of weakness. I remember one of the guys I shared with, one night was in tears because of what happened, and we were brutal to him, and I don't take pleasure in that, but it was our way of sort of dark humor of dealing with what had happened. And also at that time, there was a presumption that there was a cure around the corner. If someone would say, if you get some movement back in your fingers in 3 months, then you're going to be fine. And of course, 3 months come. Well, actually, the new research says that if you get a tingle in your toes after 6 months, you're going to be fine. And before you know it, 3 months, 6 months, a year's gone by, life goes on. You're getting on with your life, and before you know it, I look around, and that 40 years ago, and I'm still waiting for that miracle cure.
Yeah. So, what do you think about that then, Geoff? You raised something around hope and acceptance, and there's a real sort of fine line between the two. So,
oh my goodness, yeah.
What are your thoughts about hope and acceptance?
Yeah. So this is a topic of conversation that I occasionally have with some of my fellow quadriplegics. I think you need hope of some kind. Now, that I don't want to get into the world of, I don't believe I'm mixing that up with faith, but some people's faith gives them hope. And if that gets them through the day, then fantastic. But you do need, hope is an interesting one, because I have an interesting argument with Christopher Reeve, who you may remember was Superman.
Yes, of course.
And Christopher Reeve broke his neck in the mid to late 90s riding a horse.
Yeah.
And we had a live television discussion debate between the two of us, because he was determined to walk again. That was his absolute goal in life, was he was going to walk again.
Yeah.
And he did all the research, and he was in an exoskeleton and walking. And I believed quite firmly that I wanted, so long as my environment was barrier free, so long as my environment meant I wasn't being discriminated against, but actually, although being in a wheelchair is an inconvenience, and it is a serious inconvenience, that if my environment was okay, and my friends and family around me were fine, and I could get from A to B and do a job, that to me was a priority. Right. Being able to get on a bus or get into my office, not trying to walk again. And then you get into this very philosophical area of walking is good, wheelchair bad. And people see you, oh, are you in a wheelchair? Will you get better? What do you mean better? I'm absolutely fine. Thanks very much. I just sit down a lot. And there is, for those people that are in pain and suffering and having a real problem with it, then I get it. I get why you would not want to prolong that. But being in a wheelchair, actually, if your environment is okay and people around you are okay, and your mental attitude towards it. I mean, this is the first time I've spoken about my disability in weeks or months, because I don't think about it. And in many ways, that is what gives me the drive to get up in the morning and, go to work and get up tomorrow, and plans to get up for the next several years. But there are those who I know who do not have that hope. They don't have the faith, and they dwell perhaps too long on their disabilities, and
Yeah.
that is not good for you mentally. And I think the more or the less you do in your life, the more time you have to worry and dwell upon what you can't do rather than focus on what you can. So that's rather a long-winded answer.
No, and I think these are very important conversations to have. And I love that you've had this with Christopher Reeve himself, and have also sort of been able to have different perspectives in the conversation as well. Because I think what you've described is from hope also comes priority. So for Christopher, his priority was to walk again. And then he reached out and went into the sort of exoskeleton world to enable that for himself. For you, your hope was to live a barrier-free life, and you've then positioned yourself to enable that for yourself, and now for others as well. So there's something that connects hope and priority as well together very much.
And also because when I was in hospital for a year, I became very close to my nurse, Elaine. And we left hospital together. So Elaine, we married the following year. So, and Elaine and I have been married 38 years now. But as a young man leaving hospital with a spinal injury, with a fiancée who we later got married, I had aspirations, and they were very powerful aspirations. I'd always had them. Because I knew what I wanted to do when I was sailing. I always been able to visualize what I want to do. Right. And I've always had that ability from a young person that I wanted to go to sea. I could see myself, shut my eyes, I could see myself, sailing a yacht, and I drove towards it. And that had to change pretty drastically and quickly after the accident. But then I realized that if I wanted to achieve those aspirations with Elaine, marrying Elaine, buying a house, nice holidays, start a family, all of those things, I was going to need to understand how I was going to do that. And I wasn't going to be able to do it as a sailor at that time. So I retrained. It was the mid-'80s, early days of computing. I saw an opportunity and I grabbed it. And I, despite all of the problems, I spent a year learning computing and database management. And that was ultimately to set me on my path through my career.
Very, very interesting. So is that something that you're an advocate then of, in terms of the vision and the goal setting and having something to head for? Do you think it's important for people to do that, have that end in mind?
Well, what's interesting is all my life I've done this, and I never realised it was something I was doing.
Right.
And for those that are old enough to cast their mind back to, I think it was 2003, it was the Rugby World Cup, and it was England were in the final, and Johnny Wilkinson, who was about to kick the ball, I'm not sure if you can see this, but he held his arms up, looked at the post, looked at his hands, looked at the post, looked at his hands, and kicked the goal. And from that point forward, everyone was saying, what was Johnny Wilkinson doing? And the doctors came out and said he was visualizing the ball going between the posts.
Right.
And I thought, that's what I've been doing. I've been doing that all my life.
Yeah.
I've been visualizing, we haven't talked about it yet, but I've done some great sailing adventures. And I've grown up visualizing me crossing the finishing line.
Right.
And the, adoration of the crowd, horns going, cheering, waving.
Yeah.
And I've been able to visualize that. And then I think, right, if that's what I'm going to achieve, and I'm going to achieve it, it is achievable. How do I go about making that work? And then I have my own little plan I put together in my head and slowly work towards it. I do realize that a number of the things I've done, I could not have come out of hospital and done immediately. There's been a stepping stone sort of route to doing the things that I've done, and I've been able to do some amazing things, but only because I've crossed each bridge one at a time.
Yeah, and the brain is a remarkable piece of kit, because that rehearsal of what hasn't even happened yet puts you in a state and in a place of making that happen. And it does that, and it's wonderful that we're able to do that. So I think that is a really, really strong message: is know where you want to go, and only then can you take those steps that are going to get you in that direction. Absolutely. For sure. And for you, I mean, where you wanted to go was no short of being extraordinary from what I've seen of you. So you've sailed single-handed around the UK. You've sailed unassisted across the Atlantic. These are extraordinary feats and achievements for you. So
and it's not until I look back, Alka, and myself and see that. Sometimes I look at them and think, was that really me that did it? But at the time, and I have something big that we're planning for next year.
Right.
At the time, it was just, of course I can do it. Why can't I do it? Why would I not be in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in my electric wheelchair on my own, sailing a big 60-foot catamaran thousands of miles from land? Why wouldn't I be doing that? I look back and I think the steps to get there were
Right.
incredibly onerous. I like being tested like that. I like overcoming the obstacles.
Yeah. And when you look at success and people see your success, for example, I think what we don't recognize is that there is no such thing as an overnight success. This didn't just happen. Geoff didn't just get on that catamaran. There were steps that took you there. There was a commitment. There was unwavering focus. There was a deep desire and a passion and some sort of need for this to be part of your life. But behind every successful person that you see, every achievement you see is all of that. And I think that's really important for people to recognize, don't you think? That
Yeah, because those are the bits that no one sees, aren't they? They're the bits that you do privately.
yes.
Whether it's the emails you make, the phone calls you make, the meetings you have, the challenges you overcome on that journey. They're not of interest to anybody, but you have to overcome them. And when we see, this is what I've got a 21-year-old son, and he's very well grounded. But the last 5-10 years, he's grown up with the social media world, and he's exposed to influencers who, can promote themselves as almost instant overnight success. Look at me, I have a nice car, or look at me, I have a nice whatever watch or holiday, and it becomes very demanding and aspirational for young people, but they don't necessarily see that there's a lot of hard work that's gone behind it. And I worry that people they're too demanding, and they think something they're entitled, I suppose is the word, to success without the hard graft behind it.
Yeah, there's the hard graft, and then there's the heart as well that needs to go into all of this as well, isn't there? So tell us a little bit about the treacherous moments then, Geoff, whilst you were on your sailing adventures. And there must have, of course, been challenges. What were those moments?
Well, I guess predominantly, I and it's the one thing I tend to forget, is that I'm quadriplegic. So I can't move or feel below my chest. I potentially suffer hugely from dehydration, exposure to the elements, but also the possibility of pressure ulcers, things that's sitting down for a long time. And all these things I have to manage whilst trying to put together a challenge, or when it's actually underway. I mean, the Round Britain Challenge took 110 days. Wow. I visited 50-odd harbours around the country. With a team of 5-6 people helping me. And it was intense, to say the least, but it was every morning I was cold, in the boat, tired, wet, hungry, and all of that stuff. But ultimately, there's only so many times you can say that, and people go, yeah, don't tell me you were tired, wet, cold, and hungry. So what got you through it? And on every one of those, because when I went around Britain, it was a series of day trips. Every single one, I left that harbour in the morning, and in my head, I was finishing crossing the finishing line in the afternoon. Right. But interspersed with that was some, and the one thing you can plan, but you can't second guess or anticipate the weather or different I call it different environments. And when I do my public speaking, I talk about having a plan, right, or a vision, which is to, for example, sail around Britain. Yeah. The details of that plan are where you go en route. And you have to understand, as long as you keep the vision the same, the plan may change, but the plan may change for a number of reasons and different environmental reasons. It can be the weather, which forces you to change, but it's, in a parallel world, if you're in business, it can be a commercial change, it can be, a political change, it can be a financial change that comes along and has the potential to derail your plan so you don't achieve your vision. And it's having the ability to be dynamic when that happens. And there were several times going around Britain, for example, where the weather, which is one of the uncontrollable factors in my life, almost curtailed the entire journey because it was unpredicted, it was very bad, and it had it would put us in danger. So I had to revisit the plan, in other words, the route, so that when we did actually achieve, we got around Britain. I did it, albeit having changed the plan. The going across the Atlantic was a bit different because it was one start and one stop. So the vision was to go across the ocean, but the plan, you couldn't change it very much because there's not much you can do in the middle of an ocean, particularly when you get hurricane force winds. So it's a case of being dynamic and recognizing what your limitations are.
Yeah. And again, back to sort of that vision and keeping that in mind. It's that goal, it's that end point that we all want to get to, but remembering that there are many routes to Rome, right? And being veered off track is not an indication of failure at all, which is where a lot of people do fall down. You've got this plan and one step doesn't quite go how you want it and you think that's it. But really, it's about looking at the opportunity for just finding another route, because there's another route that will also lead to Rome as such, or wherever that vision is for you.
And with me, and maybe sorry to cut across you.
No, not at all.
With me, maybe it's just it's a me thing. I am, and this is a personal opinion, I am hypersensitive that people, I know they're not, but I sense they might be judging me on my achievements because of my disability. Judging is the wrong word. Making allowances for me. Right. So I want to prove that I can do these things as well as anyone else can. What I don't want is for people to make allowances on the basis, oh, that's okay. He failed in that instance, but he failed because he's disabled.
Right.
And I'm sure they don't do that. But if I can give you an example, when I worked for Deloitte, for 12, 15 years. And I'm not an accountant, but I was in the marketing department.
Right.
And in 15 years, I barely ever had a day off sick when I was in the office. There was one time when I had quite a severe pressure ulcer on my foot, and I wore a shoe that sort of was cut out at the back. I remember going into work one morning and the shoe came off. And rather than ask someone, I felt so embarrassed about it, I threw a newspaper over it and left it all day on the floor, hidden. And I sat under my desk so no one could see I had one shoe on and one shoe off. No one would have minded, giving me my shoe back. But I just felt they might make judgments or allowances because of my disability. So maybe I pushed myself too hard to try and pretend I'm not disabled, because in my mind, I just don't even think of it. But I would, it's just something that sits personally with me.
Okay. So let's just unravel that a little bit more then. Even the word disability and how that is perceived. And also, do you feel that your achievements would have been any differently regarded were you not disabled, quadriplegic, in a wheelchair? Would you have still had the same level of, gosh, look what he's done, how incredible, what a feat of endurance? Or do you think that we still do make allowances? Because I think we have to get to the nitty gritty of this, that there is a sort of dichotomy in people's minds, isn't there?
Yeah. And so it's kind of a difficult tightrope to walk, because I've seen both sides of the coin. I spent 18 years of my life as a fit, healthy young man, and I've spent the last 40 years as someone with quite a severe disability. So I've seen both sides of it. And there are those who, I'm not saying no one enjoys being disabled, but there are those who have understood how to live their lives or use the system because of their disability, and are unashamedly happy to talk to you about their disabilities, and that is absolutely fine for them. My view is I think partly because I don't even think about my disability until we have conversations about it. I'm conscious there's this tightrope between trying to present yourself as a safe bet to an employer, for example.
Yeah.
When I'm not going to, don't employ me and I'm going to be off work every day with my problems. And maybe because of that, we try extra hard. But equally, you then have to try and confront, if I call it injustice or unfairness in the environment, whether that's lack of access to public transport, whether it's lack of access to public buildings or domestic buildings, or to the workplace, and people making allowances for that. It frustrates me that I can't get on the bus and go to London like all my friends can. It frustrates me that I can't go and stay in an Airbnb. I was just looking before we started talking at some Airbnb options, where some holiday options, and I'm hugely limited. I'll be lucky if there's less than, or there's as much as 2 to 3% of the options are wheelchair accessible, and then they're more expensive, and then they're more likely to be booked up. So there's an unfairness there that it costs more, that it's more inconvenient. But having reached where I am in life now, and I do have a profile, it depends on who you are, what you think of that profile. I'm not sure it's necessarily right for Geoff Holt to be, naming and shaming a Airbnb in Bournemouth because I can't get into it. I think there's a bigger picture there, which we're better. Oh my goodness, we're better than we were 40 years ago, but we still have a long way to go.
And what you've then done, Geoff, is sort of taken one area that you've seen as a barrier, combined that with your passion for water, and have done something very proactive, haven't you? So in terms of setting up your organisation, your charity, Wet Wheels, that's given you a sort of inroad into, right, there's unfair access to water for disabled people, so I'm going to do something about that. And I think there's a very strong message in that as well, because for people listening who maybe do identify as disabled, it's also thinking about, well, what are the barriers in my life that perhaps I want to champion or highlight or get support for changing this. And you've gone ahead and done that for you and what's important to you. So tell us a little bit about Wet Wheels and how that got set up.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. You understand my life is sailing. It's I've ran Britain, Atlantic. I was involved in a national sailing charity from the mid-90s for many years, helping disabled people get sailing in the UK. And I've been able to benefit from that personally. I've been able to sail and do the things that I love. It's not exactly been able to make a career in it for a long time, because it's just was a passion of mine. But I went after the Atlantic. I had a lot of people contacting me from all over the world, actually, genuinely saying, "How can I do what you do?" Right. And I realised there was very few places to signpost them. I could signpost them to, places that took small boats on rivers and lakes, but nothing offshore, nothing big, nothing really meaningful. And I did a lot of research into it, and there was nothing. And so, being quite laser focused, I'm of the opinion if you can't, find it, then it's down to you to make it happen. Okay. And I did a lot of research. It cost me a lot of money. I had to part mortgage my house, but I knew Wet Wheels would work. Wet Wheels is power, but we call it power boating, but it's not, doing 100 miles an hour everywhere. It's a 9 meter, 30 foot power catamaran, twin by twin, 325 horsepower engine. So it's like 650 horsepower. Each boat takes 14 people, of which 10 of them can be disabled. And of those 10, 3 can be wheelchair users. And what makes Wet Wheels even more unique is I wanted to empower disabled people rather than provide something for them to give them a trip around the harbour.
Right.
I wanted them to take control. So the reason we take 10 people is they can bring mums and dads, brothers and sisters. So it's a shared experience. But then the real USP is that everyone gets to steer the boat. Everyone.
Right.
I've designed wet wheels with a ramp up under the steering wheel, with a super light hydraulic powered steering. If they can't use the wheel or hold it, we have a joystick option. And if they can't do that, then the captain will hold the wheel for them.
Right.
But whatever happens, everyone has the opportunity to go under that steering wheel of a boat that's worth £250,000 and to drive it at 30 knots with, and get all the photos they like, and, and to go back and tell their friends, look what I've done. And I wanted to do it because I wanted to give something back. I don't want to sound too altruistic, but everything I'd done to that point they weren't exactly vanity projects, but they were projects I wanted to test myself. And inadvertently, I got a huge amount of public publicity from them. So I was able to use that platform to try and help and identify these disabled people who were not, they were all disabled people. But one thing that Wet Wheels has shown, and this is a delicate one to talk about in the disability world, one thing Wet Wheels has shown is that there are a subset of disabled people, an invisible, often excluded subset of disabled people who are who have profound and complex disabilities. So these are, I can't remember the exact terminology, but something like CP plus 3 or something. In other words, multiple disabilities in their lives. Now, these are predominantly younger people because of their disabilities. They tend to be life-limiting. So consequently, they tend to be younger. They tend to, these young people will tend to be in hospice settings or special educational needs settings. And the reason that I refer to them as being excluded is they're not the people you see in the Paralympics. They're not the people you see in disability sport on TV of some sort, or wheelchair basketball. These are often young people who have at least one, if not two, full-time carers. Their daily routines are massively more complicated than most people would ever understand. But these are people, these are human beings, and however one may view their ability to articulate or to enjoy their environment, I challenge anyone who thinks that to come and see some of these young people on Wet Wheels, because young people who may not ordinarily not display any expressions visually or physically, once they're on a boat going fast, not everyone but most of them, or the spray in their face, something's going on, something's changing, something's happening, and something is happening for good, not for scaring them or anything. Something is happening for good. And when I first saw that, I realized, my goodness, we've hit upon something here. This is something that these young people and their families cannot ordinarily go and do, something that is just fun. So sorry, that was a very long-winded answer to your question. But what I will just say that one boat in 2011 is now 8 boats around the UK, everywhere from Edinburgh, Channel Islands, Cornwall, Yorkshire, and down in Kent. And we've got plans for another 4. We're taking well over 10,000 people a year on the water now. So, you can probably sense my pride.
Oh, I totally can. And even I can just visualize the one person, the one young adult, and that emotion that you've created through that experience. And it's that experiential as well, isn't it? And there's something very, the analogy, the metaphor you draw, again, you're very visual by the sounds of it, in terms of the visual of holding the steering wheel, steering your life, being empowered to do that, even if it's just for those minutes or those moments, is a very strong visual image to do that as well. And I'm thinking about also the invisible disabilities as well here, Geoff. So really thinking about the emotional impact, and you've touched on this a little bit, and the mental health that we don't see so outrightly in disabled people as well. What have your conversations been like on that front? Because of course, I imagine you would have some very deep and profound conversations with people who are getting onto your boats as well. But what's been your experience of mental health in disabled people?
So, in fact, I'd literally just put it back in the drawer, but I was looking at an impact report that I wrote in 2012. So 13 going on 14 years now, after my first year. And it was a lovely glossy document. And on the front, in extra big letters, in italics, was a quote from me. And it said, "One day, doctors will be prescribing a trip on wet wheels instead of pills." Now, that didn't have a name then, did it? No one knew what social prescribing was then. And I look at that and I think how prescient that was. How, I'd obviously seen it then, but I didn't know how to articulate it. And this, although I've seen, the mental health conversation is one that we have more and more nowadays. It's more something that we hear on the news and we read about it. In about 2016, 2017, I started to think about personally why I go on the boat and how I feel better. And actually what this means in the whole wet wheels conversation is wet wheels something. We are an inclusivity strategic partner of Sport England, and sport is very important, of course. And when we apply for funding, we often go to the sporting bodies. But in my mind, I'm thinking, why aren't we going to the health bodies for funding? Because we've not been able to evidence what we do. And then it really impacted me during lockdown and COVID. And to keep things going, we couldn't go on the boat. We had some virtual trips where we would have a gathering on one of the YouTube channels and show what a trip was like, and we'd talk about it. But I did an interview with a lady who then at the time was chief executive of somewhere called the Rose Road Association. And Rose Road, I'm patron of it, and it's an association in Southampton that supports, does residential care for up to 400 those severely disabled people in Hampshire. When I was speaking to Juno, she said, her words were, and they still resonate with me, she said, the issue with COVID is it's the anguish that these young people are going through because their routine has changed. No longer are, the people they know leaning over and stroking their hair. They're now wearing masks and they can't touch them. And she said it's an utter and complete anguish, and they are frightened. But during the talk, we just agreed that what makes it even more powerful is it's a disproportionate anguish for people with disabilities. It's a disproportionate disadvantage to me that I can't go and find somewhere in Bournemouth for an Airbnb for the night. It's disproportionate because disabled people go through these challenges and struggle a lot harder than people who aren't disabled. And that applies to mental health as well. They have been disproportionately affected by it. And we still see people now who are still struggling the byproduct, if you like, of what we went through 2 years ago. And to prove how important it is and demonstrate, so something like Rose Road or Trelaws is another college that we work with physically disabled people, is instead of, as they used to, they would bring 6 or 7 disabled people with us. And, it's not cheap to hire the boat for the day. It was so important to them, but under the COVID rules where they couldn't mix with more people, they would charter the whole boat for one person. Just one disabled person and a carer would come out for 3 or 4 hours on the boat. And I would say to them, it's a lot of money. Why do you do that? And they say, because wet wheels is so important to their mental health. It's their way of recharging their batteries. And, you don't ever, I can talk about it. I can show you videos and photos. It's not until you are on the water and you physically see it with your own eyes, you realise something magic is happening out there.
Wonderful. What about professionally? the mental health impact professionally? Because of course you've mentioned you've worked at the executive level with Deloitte, you've got this entrepreneurial spirit yourself. What's the impact of mental health, emotional health that you've seen on entrepreneurship?
I think people are they are happier to discuss it openly. I think there are people, and I'd probably count myself amongst them, who are old school, who are still a bit more uncomfortable with it. But watching people be more open and frank about their mental health is enabling them, I think, to deal with it, I think, in a better way. I think also it means more people are taking control of their lives, and probably, and this isn't a general rule of thumb, but I think they are maybe down, they're doing reduced hours, let's say, because they realise the importance of mindfulness and time for themselves to take time out. And I can't advocate that enough. I think it's one thing, if I had forgotten to say today, if I was to say anything, it's take time out.
Yeah.
Go to your happy place,
whatever
that is. Go and sit there, look at the birds and the trees, look up. Wherever you are, look up occasionally in town. Look at something different, and it just really helped to take your mind off things. And I'm fairly certain that it kind of got exaggerated with COVID, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think all of us were being impacted in ways. Bizarrely, I think people with disabilities got through that in slightly easier than some people. Didn't leave my home for a year during COVID, but actually I was quite used to being at home anyway, so it wasn't such a huge burden. But I think that's probably how disabled entrepreneurs rather are dealing with it. From a disabled entrepreneurship point of view, it's caused more than its fair share of challenges, and at times, I don't know how I'm managing to carry on, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, as they say.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Geoff, absolutely. So speaking of health, then, what are you doing for your health, physical, emotional? What's your go-to? What do you do?
So I've had a couple of unexpected knockbacks. I mean, I've been in a chair 40 years now, and when I first had the accident, they said people with quadriplegia would live about 20 years, and that's down to improvements in medical health and science, but also having the love and care of someone who looks after me and understands and keeps me healthy. But slowly things are getting older and creakier, and the odd issue popping up. Well, actually, that's not. It's happening more frequently now. So I do have to be careful and mindful of my health.
Yeah.
I have I was talking about the next. What next? And what I want to do is take wet wheels around Great Britain. I've done it in a sailboat. I want to be the first quadriplegic to do it in a powerboat. And we are quite excited about that. That will be happening in, I think, probably May, June next year. But again, it's my poor wife, she just rolls her eyes and thinks, what's he up to now? But what I want to do is launch a campaign for the final 3 or 4 boats for wet wheels, which will then complete the dream. The dream was to ensure that disabled people in the UK were within an hour's drive of a wet wheels experience where they could go offshore and enjoy being on the water. And we are about 3 or 4 boats short of finishing that dream. So I thought, if I go around Britain in a wet wheels boat, get lots of publicity, help raise lots of money, and we'll then be able to finish the dream. And one would hope at that point that I might be able to take a back seat.
Oh, I love that. I think the vision is there, and I know it's 100% going to happen from everything that I've heard today. And this isn't just your dream. This becomes a dream for others as well who do go onto your boats and your ships and your yachts and your sailing boats and power boats as well. So wonderful. Tell me where people can find you, Geoff. What's the best way?
So just, I think if anyone types in wet wheels, all one word, into Google, you'll find the main foundation site. And then all 7, 8 operators are listed under there to find your nearest one. and then contact one of our local operators. We've got a great bunch of people. I should just say that I always get asked to do things as the founder of Wet Wheels or the person that sailed around Britain or whatever, and people forget there's a team behind me. I'm just the one that rocks up and does the interviews and things, but I always have great teams of people, and the Wet Wheels operators around the country are just amazing what they do. They're running these boats as social enterprises. So we moved away from the charity model. We do have an overseeing charity, but each of the operators are community interest social enterprises. And the reason I wanted that rather than local charity groups is I wanted them to operate in a commercial sense. I wanted them to run 7 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day, in a proper commercial sense, drawing upon all that experience from Deloitte. And so far, touch wood, it's working really well. So, to get in touch with me through the website, or just type in Geoff Holt, you'll find me somewhere on social channels, and I'd love to hear from you.
Oh, wonderful. And I'm sure you will, Geoff, after this. Finally, just what was the inspiration behind the name Wet Wheels?
I don't know if you've been following me or earwigging on my conversations. It's so weird, strange you should ask that, because on Saturday I was made an honorary member of my local Rotary Club, right. Hamble Valley Rotary Club, and unfortunately one of the founding members wasn't there. As a chap called Bev Smith, and Bev, when I joined Hamble Rotary in 2007, everyone has nicknames in the Rotary Club, everyone.
Yeah.
And when I joined, he said, we're going to need a nickname for you. And I said, I know what, I'm going to call myself Skids. Skids, he said, that's hard, terrible. I said, no, because I got wheels, and I called me Skids with a Z at the end. He came to the next meeting and said, no, you're not Skids, you're Wet Wheels. And I thought, yeah, that's fantastic. And at the time, I was writing a column for a national sailing magazine each month. And I was writing it under the name Geoff Holt, and I thought, no, I'm going to write it under the name Wet Wheels. Right. It became the Wet Wheels page. And then 2 years later, when I got my first Wet Wheels boat, what should I call it? I just called it Wet Wheels. And in fact, I got my Twitter name is Wet Wheels. Oh. So that's where it came from. And if it wasn't for the lovely Bev Smith, it would have been called Skids. So I think we'll agree Wet Wheels is far better.
Oh, love it. Wet Wheels it is. And it's a great fit for you. Oh, it's been wonderful, wonderful speaking to you, Geoff. I'm sure that people will be reaching out for you. Thank you so much for sharing your whole story from childhood to exactly where you are now, and your vision for the future for Wet Wheels as well. And I'm really humbled by everything that you're doing for your community as well. Thank you so much.
Bless you. Thank you, Alka. Thank you for having me.
You see, I told you he was extraordinary. What a wonderful conversation. Paralyzed in a swimming accident at the age of 18, and then going on to become the first disabled person to single-handedly sail around Great Britain. That was in 2007. Then 2009, he sailed across the Atlantic Ocean completely unassisted as a quadriplegic. And then, quite deservedly, 2008, of course, he was awarded an MBE for services to disabled sailing. Geoff was named Yachtsman of the Year. And he certainly is a man of vision, isn't he? I really, really enjoyed that conversation. And we were chatting earlier, and we were really talking about the fact that, well, we've got lots and lots of evidence and information about the benefits of nature, haven't we? We've somehow turned the world green, which is fabulous. But now it's time to understand the benefits of water and turn the world blue. So that's what I'll be diving into in next week's show, Blue Spaces, and what the health benefits of being in and around water very specifically are. So see you next week, and I wish you a health activating day.